October 10th, 1900, 7th year. Columbus, State, Ohio. In the prison infirmary, it smells of carbolic acid, damp plaster, and hopelessness. On a narrow institutional cot lies a woman. Her skin has a gray, earthy hue. Her breathing is intermittent and heavy. She's completely blind. The doctors have diagnosed nervous prostration and uremia. Kidneys have failed. Heart barely beats. Today, this woman turns exactly 50 years old, but no one will bring a cake into the cell. No one will light candles. No one will sing a congratulatory song. The only sound in the room is the scratch of the prison doctor's pen, filling out the death certificate for inmate number 33,298. Her name is Elizabeth Bigley, but the world will remember her by another name. The name that just 3 years ago opened the doors of the most impregnable safes in America. Cassie Chadwick. Death on a prison cot is the end.
But to understand the scale of the tragedy, we need to roll the film back. Not to the moment of birth, but to the moment of triumphant madness. Let us transport ourselves to 1900, 3rd year. Cleveland, State, Ohio. Euclid Avenue Street, known as Millionaire's Mile. Here, among the mansions of the Rockefellers and the Hannahs, stands a house that shines brighter than the others. Inside, a woman in silks, laden with diamonds so thickly that it seems vulgar even for the era of excess. She is receiving guests. She has just returned from shopping. That day she bought not one dress, but 20. She ordered not one piano, but 8 at once, just to send them as gifts to friends whose names she barely remembered. She spent money with such speed, as if it were burning her hands. A check for $40,000 for a pearl necklace? Easily. That is the equivalent of nearly $1.5 million by the exchange rate of 2024 year. And she wrote this check without even blinking an eye. The onlookers watched her with a mix of envy and awestruck horror. Where did this money come from? The answer was whispered from the drawing room to the smoking room. She is Andrew Carnegie's daughter. Illegitimate, of course, but beloved. Carnegie, the Steel King, a man whose fortune exceeded the budgets of many European countries. To be his daughter meant to possess the keys to the world. But let us return to reality. November 1900, 4th year. The town of Oberlin. A cold wind drives dry leaves and scraps of newspapers down the street. But in the main square, it is hot. A crowd of angry people is storming the doors of the Citizens National Bank. There are no aristocrats here. Here are farmers in muddy boots, widows in mourning, students from the local college. They are shouting, crying, and pounding their fists on the closed doors. They have come for their money. But there is no money. Inside the bank, in the office paneled in mahogany, sits President Charles Beckwith. He is 63 years old. All his life, he has built a reputation as the most honest man in the city. Now he sits, clutching his head in his hands, looking at the open safe. The safe is empty. More precisely, there is no gold in it. It contains a stack of IOUs totaling several times the bank's capital. And on each paper is the signature, Andrew Carnegie. Charles Beckwith does not yet know that he will die in a few weeks. The doctors will write heart attack, but the whole city will know the truth. He died of shame. He gave the savings of widows and orphans to a woman who simply promised him access to great wealth. Cassie Chadwick is not just a swindler. She is an architect of illusions. 100 years before Anna Delvey deceived the elite of Manhattan by posing as a rich German heiress,
Cassie did the same thing, but on a much grander scale. Anna Delvey used Instagram and fashionable outfits.
Cassie used human greed and the fear of missing out. Her scam is estimated by historians at a sum of between $2 and $20 million of that time. In today's money, that is a staggering figure. Around $70 million. $70 million obtained against the collateral of air. Against the collateral of a name, a man who did not even know of her existence. How was this possible? How could the daughter of a simple railroad worker from the backwoods of Canada hypnotize jaded Wall Street financiers? Why did no one call Carnegie? Why did bankers, who usually demand collateral for every cent, hand her suitcases of cash on her word alone? We dive into a story that reads like a financial thriller, but is a strictly documented court transcript. Here, every cent is accounted for, and every tear has its price. This is the story of the Gilded Age, where outward brilliance concealed a rotten core. To understand how the bank in Ohio collapsed, we need to leave the marble halls and move to a place that smells of coal dust and manure. 1857th year, Eastwood, province of Ontario, Canada. A remote province, cut off from the big world. It was here, in the family of a railroad worker, Daniel Bigley, that a girl named Elizabeth was born. Betsy. In the future, she would call herself the illegitimate daughter of a Scottish billionaire, but the truth was far more prosaic and harsh. The Bigley family did not go hungry, but they counted every cent. Betsy grew up as a strange child. She had a speech impediment, a slight stutter, and a terrifying, unblinking gaze. Psychologists today would call her a high-functioning sociopath. She did not play with dolls. She played with lies. The first rehearsal of the great scam took place when Betsy was only 13 years old. She forged a letter. Not a love note, but an official notice that she had inherited a small fortune from a non-existent uncle in England. With this letter, she went to a local merchant and opened a line of credit. She was believed. Why? Because no one could entertain the thought that a little girl from a farm was capable of such cynical forgery. This became her first lesson. The bolder the lie, the more willingly people believe it. People want to believe in the fairy tale of sudden wealth, even if it is someone else's fairy tale. When Betsy grew up, Canada became too small for her. She craved scale. At 22, she traveled to the United States. It was an era when you could erase your past simply by moving to another state and changing your hat. She tried her hand as a fortune teller and a medium. Remember this moment. Betsy Bigley becomes Madame Lydia Devereux. This was her business school. Working as a medium, she learned the main skill she would later use against Wall Street bankers: cold reading. She learned to look a person in the eye and tell them what they most wanted to hear. She sold hope. Bankers, as it would later turn out, were no different from widows coming to seances. Both wanted to know that the future promised them gold. In 1882, she arrives in Cleveland. Here, she pulls off her first major scam posing as an heiress. She pledges property that does not belong to her and takes out loans under the names of fictitious guarantors. But the system fails. She is arrested. Her trial in Toledo, Ohio, in 1889 became a one-man show. The sentence, 9.5 years in prison for forgery. For any other woman, this would have been the end, social death. But for Betsy, it was simply a university. In prison, she behaved not like an inmate, but like a guest who had been mistakenly locked in an economy class room. She charmed the guards. She predicted the future for the prison warden. She wrote complaint letters to the governor, future President William McKinley, playing the part of a repentant victim of circumstances. And it works. She is released early, after only 3 years. She walks free in 1893. She is 36 years old. She has a criminal record, no money, and no reputation. But she has a plan. She understands. To steal millions, you need the perfect disguise. She needs a facade. She needs a name that will become a shield. She returns to Cleveland, changes her name to Mrs. Cassie Hoover, and begins her hunt. Her target is not money directly, but status. She finds the perfect victim, Dr. Leroy Chadwick. Dr. Chadwick is the embodiment of respectability. A widower, a prominent physician, living in a mansion on prestigious Euclid Avenue. He is wealthy, but dull. He is lonely and vulnerable. Cassie plays the part of a modest but well-off widow from a good family before him. She asks him to treat her for female ailments. Massages, confidential talks, soft touches. The doctor is enchanted. He sees in her a refined lady, not an ex-convict from Toledo. In 1897, they marry. It was her most cynical move. Marriage to Dr. Chadwick cleansed her biography more cleanly than any lawyer. From Betsy Bigley, the daughter of a railroad worker and former inmate number 33, she became Mrs. Cassie Chadwick, mistress of a mansion on the corner of Euclid Avenue and 82nd Street. Now she had access to high society. She had servants, carriages, and store accounts. But it never occurred to Dr. Chadwick, whom he had let into his home. He did not know that his new wife, sitting at his own dining table, was already calculating schemes to use his good name to rob the century. She did not love him. She used him as a foundation for her future pyramid of lies. The house on Euclid Avenue became her headquarters. But her husband's money was not enough. The doctor was wealthy, but not fabulously so. And Cassie wanted not just comfort. She wanted the power that only absurd, unlimited money gives. She needed something more than a doctor's salary. And then she remembered the name that resounded from every newspaper headline. The name of the man who had just sold his steel company for $480 million. Andrew Carnegie. The plan ripened. She would not steal money from her husband. She would arrange it so that the bankers themselves would bring her money, begging her to take it. All she needed was one trip to New York and one brilliant mystification that would turn a provincial doctor's wife into the secret princess of American capitalism. Betsy Bigley was dead. Born was Cassie Chadwick, a woman who decided to rewrite her destiny with ink in other people's checkbooks. And the world was completely unprepared for the spectacle she was about to stage. 1900, second year. New York, a city where the air is saturated with coal soot and the smell of freshly printed dollars. Cassie Chadwick steps out of a carriage in front of the Holland House Hotel on Fifth Avenue. She is wearing a mourning dress, although none of her close relatives have died. This is mourning for her poverty, which she has decided to end forever. Along with her to New York came Ira Reynolds, a respected lawyer and banker from Cleveland. He is here for a reason. Cassie invited him as a witness, although he thinks he is accompanying her on boring family matters. This was part of her brilliant plan. For the lie to work, it needed to be confirmed by someone with an impeccable reputation. The carriage stops at the house at number 2 on 91st Street. This is not just an address. This is the center of the universe of American capitalism. Andrew Carnegie's mansion.
A huge building occupying an entire block, a fortress of brick and limestone. Cassie asks Reynolds to wait in the cab.
She nervously adjusts her veil and climbs the steps. The doorman opens the door for her. Reynolds sits in the carriage and looks at his watch. 10 minutes. 15. 20. What is happening behind these walls? What could the wife of a simple Ohio doctor have to talk about with the man who built America's steel backbone? In fact, inside the mansion, a scene worthy of a vaudeville was taking place. Cassie did not meet with Carnegie. He wasn't even in town. She asked for an audience with the housekeeper, introducing herself as a lady who wanted to check the references of a former Carnegie servant named Hilda. The unsuspecting housekeeper politely conversed with her in the hallway. But to Reynolds, watching from the street, it looked like a family visit. After half an hour, Cassie came out. She was agitated. Getting into the carriage, she accidentally dropped her purse on the floor. A sheet of paper fell out. Reynolds, being a gentleman, bent down to pick it up and froze. It was a promissory note, a debt note for $2 million. At the bottom was a signature familiar to every American: Andrew Carnegie. Reynolds raised his eyes to Cassie. She burst into tears. And in that moment, in the jolting carriage in the middle of New York, she told him the story that became the foundation of her empire. She confessed that she was Carnegie's illegitimate daughter, that the old man was tormented by guilt, that he showers her with money just to avoid a scandal. She showed Reynolds another document, a trust agreement for $7 million. $7 million in 1900's second year. To understand the scale, an average worker's salary was $500 a year. 7 million, then, is $230 million today. That was money with which you could buy a small fleet or build a town. Reynolds was overwhelmed. He swore to keep the secret. And, of course, as soon as they returned to Cleveland, he told everyone who needed to know. A secret in the banking world is the most liquid commodity. The rumor that a secret Carnegie daughter lived on Euclid Avenue spread like a wildfire. The golden age of Cassie Chadwick began. Bankers who had previously not even glanced at her now lined up to offer their services. They did not check the authenticity of the promissory notes. Why? To offend a Carnegie daughter with distrust meant to lose a client of the century. They competed for the right to lend her money. And Cassie began to spend. She entered an arms race where the weapons were luxury items. Her house on Euclid Avenue turned into a warehouse of antiques. She bought not because she liked it, but to prove her reality. If she spent like an heir to a billionaire, then she was an heir to a billionaire. She bought a pure gold organ for her living room for $9,000. Imagine this absurdity, a musical instrument costing as much as 3 good houses. She ordered a carpet woven to her designs in Belgium, which cost as much as a small hospital's annual budget. Her wardrobe appeared with sable and ermine coats, but she did not just wear them. She used items as props. Once she walked into a musical instrument store and, casually waving a gloved hand, said, "Send me 8 Steinway pianos. I want to give them to my friends for Christmas." 8 pianos. The store manager nearly fainted with joy. She hired a staff of servants that exceeded the needs of a 2-person family tenfold. Footmen, maids, cooks, gardeners. She paid them generously, but demanded absolute adoration. She introduced etiquette in the house worthy of a royal court. Guests had to wait in the drawing room while Madame deigned to come down. The most cynical thing about this period was how she treated money. She created the feeling that money was garbage to her. She could leave $100 as a tip to a waiter who simply brought her water. This was a psychological trick. People thought, no one throws money around so easily if it is stolen. Only someone with bottomless pockets can afford such carelessness. Her husband, the poor Dr. Chadwick, was pushed into the background. He lived in his own house as a guest. He saw new Ming Dynasty vases, saw cases of champagne, saw jewelers bowing to his wife. He probably asked questions, but Cassie answered vaguely, "Good investments, an inheritance from a distant relative." Or maybe he was just afraid to ask. It is so pleasant to live in paradise, even if you do not know who is paying the bill. This was the time of the Gilded Age in all its glory. On the outside, the blinding brilliance of gold and diamonds. On the inside, rot and emptiness. Cassie was not happy. She was in constant tension. She had to constantly raise the stakes. The interest on the loans was growing. The bankers who had given her money were beginning to get nervous and ask for at least partial payments. To pay off one loan, she took out 2 new ones. This was a classic financial pyramid, but built not on depositors, but on the reputation of one person. She turned her name into a brand. She became a symbol of success. The women of Cleveland copied her dresses. Men dreamed of her investing money in their business. But Cassie knew what they did not. In her safe, there were not $7 million. There was a piece of paper bought in a stationery store, and ink that she had applied herself, practicing the signature Andrew Carnegie at night by the light of a kerosene lamp. She was balancing on a rope over an abyss, juggling burning torches, and the crowd below applauded, thinking it was just a beautiful show. No one noticed that the rope had already begun to fray. The moment was approaching when gravity and mathematics would claim their rights on this Princess of Ohio. In America, at the beginning of the 20th century, there existed an invisible but insurmountable battlefield. On one side of the trenches were the old money, families whose fortunes were earned by grandfathers and great-grandfathers, Astors, Vanderbilts, Rockefellers. They spoke softly, dressed conservatively, and knew each other by name from kindergarten. On the other side stood the nouveau riche, upstarts who had burst into the elite's drawing rooms with suitcases stuffed with oil money, or, as in Cassie's case, borrowed money. Cassie Chadwick understood the rules of this war better than many. She knew it is not enough to have money. Money is something any lucky bandit can have. She needed status. She needed the old Cleveland matrons who looked at the world through their lorgnettes with condemnation to recognize her as an equal. But the doors of high society were locked. The local aristocracy knew that her husband, Dr. Chadwick, was a worthy man, but his new wife raised questions. Too loud a laugh, too many rings on her fingers, too vague a past. They smelled deceit, like purebred hunting dogs smell a fox. And then Cassie decided not to knock on the door. She decided to buy the entire building. Her tactic became total suppression by luxury. If she could not make them respect her, she would make them envy her. In 1904, she organized an expedition that would enter the chronicles of Ohio society as an example of the most vulgar and delightful waste. The occasion was perfect, the World's Fair in St. Louis. It was the main event of the year, a place where the world celebrated progress. Cassie decided she would go there not as a tourist, but as a queen. She invited a group of friends and local influential figures to accompany her. But this was not a friendly invitation to split expenses. Cassie announced, "I am paying for everything." And when she said everything, she meant a level of comfort available only to monarchs. She did not buy train tickets. She rented a private railroad palace car. It was a palace on wheels. Velvet sofas, crystal chandeliers, a personal chef, and stewards ready to fulfill any whim. While the trains sped through the states, champagne flowed like a river, and guests ate oysters delivered on ice from the Atlantic. In St. Louis, she rented an entire floor of the most expensive hotel. Gifts for her entourage rained down like manna from heaven. Expensive fans, cufflinks, hats. She bought them by the dozen, simply walking past store windows. "Take it, dear. It suits you so," she would say, signing another check. One of the witnesses later recalled a dinner she hosted. The table groaned under delicacies: turtle soup, saddle of lamb, wild duck, truffles. The cost of this one dinner exceeded a miner's family's annual earnings. Cassie sat at the head of the table, radiant and triumphant. She looked at her guests, the wives of bankers, the daughters of lawyers, and saw how greed wrestled with contempt in them. Greed won. They ate her food, drank her wine, and smiled in her face. But it was a Pyrrhic victory. Behind her back, she was called the Duchess of Diamonds. This was not respect, it was mockery. In Cleveland's high society, whispers began. "Have you seen her hands? These are the hands of a laundress, not a pianist. Where did the doctor get such means?" Cassie felt this coldness. She tried to compensate for it with even greater spending. She began to play the role of a philanthropist, but did it clumsily. She could approach a poor student on the street and shove a $50 bill into his hand, demanding only a grateful look. This was buying love by retail. In this social war, she used her mansion on Euclid Avenue as a fortress. The interiors of the house were screaming. If it was fashionable to have a Japanese vase, Cassie had 10 of them. If neighbors put a marble statue in the garden, Cassie ordered a fountain with lighting. She turned her home into a museum of kitsch. But the greatest irony was that all these people, snobs, aristocrats, bankers, who turned up their noses at her manners, ended up in her pocket. She despised them more than they despised her. She saw right through them. She knew their principles ended where big profits began. In the back rooms, she began to hint to her new friends about special opportunities. "My father, Mr. Carnegie, sometimes gives me investment advice." And these proud people, who did not invite her to their closed tea parties, suddenly became very attentive. The social wall crumbled before the promise of 50% annual returns. Cassie understood the main truth of the Gilded Age. It does not matter who you are by birth. It does not matter if you know how to hold a fish fork correctly. If you promise to make rich people even richer, they will forgive you everything. Even the fact that you were the daughter of a railroad worker with a criminal record behind you. She won this battle. She became the center of attention. But she was lonely. In her huge house, among tapestries and gold, there was not a single person to whom she could tell the truth. Even her husband, Dr. Chadwick, had turned into furniture. He was just a backdrop, necessary to maintain the legend of respectability. The social ladder she had so fiercely climbed led nowhere. At the top, it was cold and windy. And most frighteningly, from there, the fall was very painful. And the fall was already inevitable. In the shadow of her triumph in St. Louis, a countdown timer had already begun to tick. A banker from Boston named Herbert Newton had started asking questions to which Cassie had no answers. In the early 20th century, American capitalism had made a strange and cynical alliance with the old European aristocracy. This was the era of the dollar princesses.
Consuelo Vanderbilt wept when her mother forced her to marry the Duke of Marlborough to trade railroad millions for a British coat of arms. Jenny Jerome became Lady Churchill. Money flowed across the ocean in exchange for titles. The father gave a check. The Duke gave a lineage. And the daughter was simply a beautifully packaged pawn in this game of vanity. Cassie Chadwick watched this fair of vanity with icy calm. She understood the rules. In this world, you are either the one who buys or the one who is sold. But Cassie did not have a daughter to marry off, and she did not need a penniless count with a castle whose roof was leaking. She needed a title of a different kind, a title that in America was valued underlying any earldom. She needed the status of a super-rich creditor. And she found her Duke. It was not a British peer, but a Boston investment banker named Herbert Newton. This was her deal of the century. If the Vanderbilt wedding was a merger of money and blood, then Cassie's deal with Newton was a merger of greed and illusion. Herbert Newton was a man of numbers. His office in Boston was a temple of pragmatism. Oak panels, the smell of expensive cigars, and the quiet rustle of bonds. He did not believe in fairy tales. He believed in collateral. Cassie came to him not as a supplicant. She entered like a queen, bestowing a favor, allowing the bank to earn from her. At stake was an astronomical sum, $190,000. In today's money, that is over $6.5 million. This was not just a loan for pocket money. This was capital with which you could build a factory. The scene in Newton's office was worthy of a playwright's pen. Cassie, in her ever-present dark silks, laid her cards on the table. Not real assets, not land, not gold. She laid out paper. A packet of promissory notes for hundreds of thousands of dollars and trust obligations with that same magical signature, Andrew Carnegie. Newton was a cynic. If a regular businessman had come to him, he would have checked every letter under a microscope. But before him sat a woman about whom all of Cleveland whispered. Illegitimate daughter. This phrase acted like hypnosis. The greed calculator went off in the banker's brain. He thought, Carnegie will never allow a trial. He will pay any amount to keep the secret of his youthful sin. Newton agreed, but he was a predator. He demanded usurious interest and full coverage. He thought he had Cassie by the throat, not understanding that he was holding dynamite with a lit fuse. This was not just a financial transaction. This was a psychological marriage. Newton married the idea of Carnegie's easy money. Cassie received the cash she desperately needed to plug the holes in her pyramid in Ohio. But in this deal, as in the marriages of the dollar princesses, there was no love. There was only cold calculation. Cassie signed the promissory note, knowing she could never repay it. She had effectively sold her future for a few months' extension of her sweet life. The moment the pen scratched the paper, Cassie's fate was sealed. Herbert Newton was different from the provincial Ohio bankers. He did not fear scandal as much as he feared losing his money. If bankers in Cleveland were willing to wait for years, afraid to offend Carnegie's daughter, then the Boston financier lived by different laws. He was part of the old East Coast elite, the very one that looked down on upstarts. Having received $190,000, Cassie returned to Cleveland in triumph. She felt all-powerful. She went shopping again, buying things she did not need for people who did not love her. She did not understand that this check from Newton had become the beginning of the end. She had launched a mechanism that could no longer be stopped. This deal exposed the very essence of the Gilded Age. Here,
Titles were sold for checks, conscience was exchanged for bonds, and the smartest people in the country, bankers and lawyers, turned into naive children at the sight of the golden calf. Herbert Newton, a man with a university education and years of experience, bought air for $6 million in modern money. Why? Because he wanted to touch Carnegie's greatness. Just as the impoverished European dukes sold their titles to American nouveau riche, Cassie sold Newton the title of trusted person of the Carnegie family. The difference was only that the dukes gave real titles, albeit useless ones, and Cassie sold a phantom. The deal was sealed. The money changed hands. Cassie bought a little more time, a little more champagne, a few more months of illusion. But in Boston, Herbert Newton had already begun to count the days until the interest payment. And when that day came, he would not listen to excuses. He would demand his due. And that demand would be the very needle that would burst the inflated bubble of Cassie Chadwick's empire. The marriage of greed and lies had taken place. All that remained was to wait for the funeral. If you had walked through Cleveland in 1900 fourth year, you would inevitably have found yourself on Euclid Avenue. At that time, it was not just a street, it was a showcase of American capitalism, which contemporaries called the most beautiful street in the world. Here lived the Rockefellers, the Hannahs, the Mathers. Here, every cobblestone was worth more than the life of a factory worker. And it was here, on the corner with 82nd Street, that stood the mansion that had become a living woman's mausoleum, the house of Cassie Chadwick. This house was not just a residence. It was a backdrop, built for one purpose: to overwhelm. The architecture of Cassie's power was heavy, stuffy, and excessive. If psychoanalysis had existed at that time as a science, Dr. Freud would have needed only to cross the threshold of this house to make a diagnosis. It was a monument to fear of empty space, horror vacui. Cassie feared empty space as much as she feared silence. Every wall, every shelf, every corner was stuffed with things. Let us go inside. The first thing that strikes the nose is the smell. A mixture of expensive floor wax, heavy musk-based perfumes, dust accumulating in the folds of velvet curtains, and a barely perceptible smell of stale cigar smoke. The air here always seemed stale, because the windows were rarely opened. Cassie did not want the outside world, dirty, noisy, real, to penetrate her sanctuary. The main monster in this collection was the famous organ. It stood in the living room, gleaming with its gilded pipes. Cassie paid $9,000 for it, enough to buy 3 good farms in Ohio. This instrument was absurd in a private home. It was meant for a cathedral. But Cassie demanded that it be played. Specially hired musicians would come to extract solemn sounds from this golden leviathan, while the hostess drank tea. The music brought no joy. It filled the ether, not allowing thoughts of debts to penetrate her consciousness. The furniture was a weapon. High-backed chairs, resembling thrones, were upholstered in brocade and velvet. Mahogany tables, inlaid with mother-of-pearl, groaned under knickknacks. Porcelain shepherdesses, silver snuff boxes, vases of Chinese cloisonné enamel. This was not a collector's collection. This was a warehouse of loot. Cassie bought everything that glittered, trying to prove the quality of her origins with the quantity of things. But the real drama unfolded not in the interiors, but in the people who inhabited this museum. The house was divided by an invisible but impenetrable wall between the masters and the servants. The staff of servants was huge for a childless couple. Footmen, lackeys, maids, cooks, gardeners. Cassie introduced a protocol worthy of Versailles.
Servants were not allowed to speak until addressed. They had to become invisible, merge with the wallpaper when Madam passed by. For Cassie, they were not people, but animated furniture, necessary mechanisms for maintaining the illusion of grandeur. A maid named Emma, who later gave testimony, said an atmosphere of fear reigned in the house. Cassie could be generous, giving away dresses, handing out money, but a minute later fly into a hysterics over a stain on the tablecloth. The servants felt the falseness. They saw how the daughter of Carnegie nervously checked the mail, how her hands trembled when she opened envelopes from banks. They heard her screaming at creditors over the phone behind the closed doors of her study, and then coming to dinner with a mask of icy calm. And there was another resident in this house, a ghost in the flesh. Dr. Leroy Chadwick. The doctor's fate in this architecture was the most tragic. He was the master of the house on paper, but a guest, in fact. Cassie had pushed him out of the space. His medical practice, his friends, his habits, all of this became insignificant in the glow of his wife. He wandered the corridors of his own mansion, careful not to touch the priceless vases. At the long dining table, set for 20 people, they often sat alone, separated by meters of polished wood and candelabras. The silence at this table was deafening. What could they talk about? The weather? The doctor's patients? Cassie could not tell her husband that her empire was held together by an honest word and forged signatures. And the doctor, likely, was afraid to ask the question that hung in the air. Cassie, where did all this come from? He preferred blindness. He hid in his library, the only room that still smelled of his old, normal life. The house on Euclid Avenue was the perfect metaphor for Cassie's life. On the outside, an impregnable fortress of stone, a symbol of reliability and eternity. On the inside, a labyrinth of lies, fear, and loneliness. Luxury did not warm here. Fireplaces burned in all rooms, consuming tons of coal. But the cold came not from the walls. It came from the hostess. Cassie's bedroom was the flight control center. Here, among silk sheets and canopies, she spent sleepless nights. It was here that she kept the very money belt she would wear at her arrest. She did not trust safes as she trusted her own body. Money had to be close, under the pillow, on the belt. This house was designed for receptions, balls, and admiration, but by a cruel irony of fate, it became a place of total isolation. Neighbors looked at the lighted windows with suspicion. Friends came only for gifts. The husband was a stranger, and Cassie herself was a prisoner, guarded not by jailers, but by things. 8 pianos, standing in the rooms, were silent. The golden organ was a silent witness to the approaching catastrophe. The architecture of power had become an architecture of a prison, even before real handcuffs clicked on Cassie's wrists. She had built a golden cage, locked herself in from the inside, and thrown away the key at the moment she first called herself by Carnegie's name. There was no happiness in this house. There was only brilliance. The cold, hard, dead brilliance of metal and stone, for which Cassie Chadwick would soon have to pay with her life. Behind the brilliant facade of the house on Euclid Avenue, where gilding blinded the eyes and servants walked on tiptoe, a darkness was hidden that outsiders could not even imagine. If on the outside it was a story of success, on the inside it was a chronicle of decay. Rot began not with money. It began with human relationships. The most terrible secret of Cassie Chadwick was not the forged Carnegie promissory note. The most terrible secret
was a young man named Emil Hoover. He lived in her house. He ran errands, handled correspondence, sometimes accompanied her on trips. To guests and neighbors, he was some kind of distant relative, a hanger-on, or simply a hired clerk. But the truth was far more cruel. Emil Hoover was her own son. A son she had given birth to many years earlier when she was still Betsy Bigley. Imagine the degree of moral degradation of a woman who, every morning, comes down to breakfast, sees her child, and forces him to play the role of a servant. She could not acknowledge him as her son, because that would destroy the legend of her age and origin. The illegitimate daughter of Carnegie had to be mysterious, lonely, and with no past. An adult son from a first marriage did not fit into the script. And Emil was silent. He lived in his mother's shadow, receiving crumbs from her table, a participant in his own humiliation. This was the very rot that was eating away at Cassie's soul faster than the fear of prison.
But not only family ties were cracking at the seams. Cassie's own psyche began to give way. Living in constant tension, where every knock on the door could mean arrest, was unbearable. The doctors of that time diagnosed her with a fashionable condition, nervous prostration. Today, we would call it severe anxiety disorder, complicated by paranoia. She stopped sleeping. The maids whispered that the light in the hostess's bedroom was on until dawn. Cassie paced the room like a tiger in a cage, mentally counting payment dates. To muffle the fear, she resorted to available means. In the medicine cabinet of that time, opiates and laudanum reigned, prescribed as harmless sedatives. Perhaps the glassy look of Cassie in some of her later photographs is explained not only by her hypnotic charisma, but also by the effects of the drugs. Financial rot was even more obvious to those who knew how to count. Cassie's pyramid required constant replenishment. The interest on the loans she took from moneylenders and greedy bankers was predatory. Sometimes the rates reached 50% per year. This was the mathematics of catastrophe. To pay back $100,000 to one bank, she had to borrow $150,000 from another. She began to make mistakes. Her lies became careless. Once she went to Pittsburgh, supposedly to meet with Papa. She returned with a stack of new promissory notes, but an experienced eye could have noticed that the paper they were written on was too cheap for a billionaire's office. But no one dared to doubt. Not yet. Inside the house itself, the atmosphere became unbearable. Dr. Chadwick, that polite and quiet man, had begun to suspect something. It was impossible not to notice how his wife flinched at every knock. It was impossible not to see the strange individuals who began to appear on the threshold. Messengers from creditors demanding a meeting. A wall of silence grew between the spouses. The doctor left for the clinic early in the morning and returned late at night, just to avoid being in this mausoleum of lies. He started drinking. Quiet, genteel alcoholism, a frequent companion to the husbands of great adventurers. Cassie, for her part, sought salvation in movement. She flitted between Cleveland, New York, and Boston. These trips were no longer triumphant tours. These were panicked runs. She was looking for a new victim, a new Charles Beckwith, someone stupid and greedy enough to give her another $500,000. It was in this period of the Gilded Age that the facade began to show cracks visible to the naked eye. In the Cleveland stores, where she was once met with bows, they now politely asked her to wait while the manager checked her account. Whispers slithered through the city like snakes. "Have you heard? The Chadwicks haven't paid for the carriage repair."
They say her check for charity came back for insufficient funds.
This was the most terrifying moment for a swindler. The moment when the magic dissipates. People did not yet know the truth, but they had already stopped believing in the fairy tale unconditionally. In November 1904 year, the rot burst through. Herbert Newton, the Boston banker who had given her $190,000, was tired of waiting. He was not part of the Cleveland circle enchanted by Cassie. He did not care for social conventions. He wanted his money. Newton hired private detectives. They began to dig. And what they found smelled not of Carnegie's steel, but of the cheap perfume of Betsy Bigley from the Canadian backwoods. They discovered that no trust fund existed, that the New York addresses she had given led nowhere. Cassie felt the noose tightening. Her hysterics became terrifying. She screamed at the servants, threw things. Once she fainted right in the living room, not theatrically as before, but for real, from exhaustion. Her body was refusing. Kidneys, heart, nerves, everything had been destroyed by years of adrenaline racing. The house on Euclid Avenue, stuffed with treasures, turned into a tomb. 8 pianos were silent. The golden organ was covered in dust, and in the center of this splendor sat a woman who knew time was up. She tried to maintain her face, putting on her best dresses, but in her eyes was the terror of a cornered animal. The rot that had been eating away at the foundation of her empire had reached the surface. The irony of fate was that the very wealth she had so craved had become the instrument of her destruction. Money did not bring her freedom. It brought her dependence, fear, and a loneliness so deep that even the presence of her own son in the house could not fill it. The end was near. Only a few days remained until the moment Herbert Newton would pull the trigger and file a lawsuit that would blow up the Ohio banking system. November 2nd, 1900, 4th year. This day began as an ordinary gray Tuesday in Cleveland, but it ended in an explosion whose shockwave blew apart reputations, fortunes, and lives. Herbert Newton, the Boston banker, tired of empty promises, did what all other creditors had feared. He stopped believing in the fairy tale. He filed a lawsuit in the Federal District Court of Cleveland, demanding the immediate return of $190,000 and interest. This was not just a lawsuit. This was the first stone thrown at the glass house. The news spread instantly. Cassie Chadwick, understanding that her time in Ohio was up, fled. She took a train to New York, hoping to dissolve in the metropolis as she had done before. She took a room at the Holland House Hotel on Fifth Avenue. The habit of luxury did not leave her, even at the edge of the abyss. She locked herself in the room, claiming to be ill. December 7th, 1900, 4th year. Someone knocked on the door of the room. It was not room service with champagne. It was federal agents. The scene of Cassie Chadwick's arrest became a legend of criminalistics of that time. She lay in bed, pretending to be dying. "I am too weak to get up," she whispered. But the detectives were not impressed. They ordered her to get dressed, and here, in the moment of the search, the most cynical detail of the entire story was revealed. Under the silk lingerie and corset on Cassie's body, a heavy belt was discovered. It did not contain letters from Carnegie or sentimental souvenirs. It contained cash. $100,000. Imagine this moment. While the bank in Oberlin was collapsing, while depositors were losing their last cents, the Queen of Ohio wore a sum equivalent to $3.5 million modern dollars on her waist. This was her golden parachute. She knew the ship was sinking and had maybe put on a life jacket stuffed with bills stolen from credulous provincials. At the same time, in Oberlin, Ohio,
a real tragedy was unfolding. As soon as the news of Cassie's arrest reached the city, depositors of the Citizens National Bank rushed to the doors. It was a panic, animal fear. People who had saved $1 for years realized their savings had evaporated. Inside the bank, President Charles Beckwith was experiencing his own personal hell. He opened the safe. Inside were stacks of promissory notes for hundreds of thousands of dollars, with the signature Andrew Carnegie. Until that moment, these papers had been for him a sacred grail, a guarantee of the bank's prosperity. Now, in the cold light of truth, they had turned into scrap paper. Beckwith was broken. He had given Cassie not only the bank's money, about $240,000, but also his personal funds, over $100,000. He had staked everything: his honor, the depositors' money, his family's future. And he had lost. But the final blow was delivered by the ghost himself. Andrew Carnegie, who had been silent for years, simply because he did not know of Cassie's existence, finally spoke. Reporters found him in New York. The steel magnate looked at the promissory notes and uttered the phrase that became the sentence. "I have not signed a debt note for 30 years. I do not even know this woman." Everything collapsed. At this moment, society saw the true face of the tragedy. This was not a cheerful story about how a clever fraudster pulled one over on the rich. This was a story of destruction. Charles Beckwith locked himself in his house. He stopped eating. He would sit in a chair for hours, staring at a single point. A few weeks later, he would die. Officially, from heart disease. In fact, his heart broke from the realization that he had, with his own hands, destroyed the life of an entire city for the smile of a swindler. Cassie was transported back to Cleveland. The crowd at the station met her not with flowers, but with curses. People wanted to lynch the Duchess. She looked at them through the window of the police carriage with her signature unblinking gaze, but the magic was gone. Now, in that look, they saw not aristocracy, but madness. Her husband, Dr. Leroy Chadwick, upon learning the truth, fled the city. He simply boarded a ship and sailed for Europe, leaving his house, his practice, and his disgraceful surname. He was another victim, a man who had wanted family comfort, but got a place in the criminal chronicles. The point of no return had been passed. The money was gone. Reputations were destroyed. The mansion on Euclid Avenue, which just yesterday had been shining with lights, now stood dark and ominous, awaiting confiscation. The golden organ fell silent forever. Cassie Chadwick was no longer an heiress. She had become defendant number 1. But even sitting in her cell, with her money belt confiscated by the police, she continued to perform. She demanded special treatment. She claimed it was all a mistake, that Papa would soon come and straighten everything out. But Andrew Carnegie did not come. The prosecutor came instead. The empire of lies crumbled into dust, leaving behind only broken lives and mountains of IOUs, which were now worth less than the ink they were written with. The myth had died. Only a criminal charge remained. When the judge delivered the sentence, 14 years in prison, it was merely a legal full stop. The true finale of this drama unfolded not in the courtroom, but in the living room of the mansion on Euclid Avenue. In April 1905, a spectacle began there which the press dubbed the Carnival of Greed. The property of Cassie Chadwick was put up for auction. The doors of the impregnable fortress, where only the chosen had once been allowed to enter, were flung open to anyone who could buy an entrance ticket, and the crowd poured inside. Thousands of people. They did not come for antiques. They came for souvenirs of the scandal. They wanted to touch, with their own hands, the silk sheets on which the queen of swindlers had slept, and to laugh at her lack of taste. This was not the sale of a philanthropist's collection. This was the autopsy of a sick mind. Auctioneers, accustomed to noble sales, were shocked. The house turned out to be a warehouse of expensive junk. It was discovered that Cassie suffered from a true hoarding mania. In the closets, they found dozens of fur coats that had never been worn, hundreds of pairs of gloves still fastened with factory tags, mountains of cheap costume jewelry mixed in with real diamonds. The symbol of this absurdity was the famous musical chair. When someone sat on it, a hidden mechanism would start to play a cheerful melody. The crowd laughed, looking at this piece of furniture worthy of a carnival sideshow, but which stood in the most expensive living room in Ohio. This was the embodiment of Cassie's style: expensive, stupid, and for show. The famous golden organ, for which she had paid $9,000, was auctioned off for a pittance. Steinway pianos were sold for the price of firewood. People bargained for every vase, trying to snatch a piece of the legend on the cheap. The mathematics of the fall was brutal. Cassie's debts exceeded $2 million of that time. The auction brought only a pitiful pittance. The depositors of the bank in Oberlin, who had lost their savings, received back only cents on the dollar. The college students, the widows, the pensioners. For them, this auction was not a show, but the funeral of their future. While in Cleveland, gawkers trampled her carpets, Cassie herself embarked on her final journey. The train took her to Columbus, to the Ohio State Prison. Even here, she tried to play her role one last time. She arrived at the prison gates with several huge trunks stuffed with dresses, hats, and carpets. She seriously believed that for money, she could furnish a suite in her cell. The prison warden met her coldly. The trunks were sent to storage. Silks and velvets were replaced with a rough denim-striped uniform. Instead of the name Mrs. Chadwick, she was assigned the number 33,298. Her fall was swift and terrible. In prison, she began to fade before their eyes. Without her corsets, without her makeup, without the flattery of those around her, she became what she truly was: an old, sick woman named Betsy Bigley. Her letters from prison were full of despair. She wrote to her son Emil, begging him to send her delicacies or warm clothes, but the letters often went unanswered. The world she had deceived for so long had simply forgotten about her. October 10th, 1900, 7th year, the finale came. Nervous prostration had progressed to uremic coma. Cassie Chadwick died in the prison infirmary. Her funeral became the final act of irony. The woman who had claimed to be the flesh and blood of Andrew Carnegie was buried in her native Eastwood, Canada. On the tombstone was written, Elizabeth Bigley. No mention of the Chadwicks, Carnegie, or millions. The circle was closed. She had returned to where she began, taking not a single cent with her. And what became of her palace? The mansion on Euclid Avenue suffered the same fate as its hostess's reputation. The street itself began to change. The era of the Gilded Age was ending. Taxes were rising, and it became unprofitable to maintain palaces. The rich moved to the suburbs. Millionaire's Mile was turning into a commercial district. Cassie's house stood empty and cursed. No one wanted to live in rooms steeped in lies. In the end, in the early 20s, it was demolished. Bulldozers destroyed the walls that had whispered of $7 million. They crushed the parquet on which $1,000 shoes had walked.
In place of the palace, they built something utilitarian and boring. Today, if you come to Cleveland at the corner of Euclid Avenue and 82nd Street, you will not find even a commemorative plaque there. There is no museum. There are no ruins. There is just city asphalt. The Great Sale ended in total destruction. Nothing remained of Cassie Chadwick's empire but yellowed newspaper clippings and court transcripts. Things bought with stolen money dissolved in America's antique shops, losing their history.
This was the end not just of one swindler. This was the harbinger of the end of an entire era. An era when you could walk into a bank with an honest face and walk out with a suitcase of money. An era of naive, predatory, and mad capitalism that believed in miracles more than in a balance sheet. Cassie Chadwick died, but her ghost remained to haunt Wall Street as a reminder. If something seems too good to be true, you will soon have to pay double for it. If you today go to the cemetery in Woodstock, province of Ontario, you will have to wander between graves for a long time to find the right one. There is no mausoleum. There is no marble angel. There stands a modest gray stone that has almost sunk into the ground. On it is carved the name, Elizabeth Bigley. This is all that physically remains of the woman who made Wall Street tremble. At the same time, in New York, Andrew Carnegie's name is carved in gold on the facade of one of the most prestigious concert halls in the world. His name is borne by universities, libraries, and foundations. The Steel King, whom Cassie used as a screen, left behind a legacy that has survived the century. He built with steel and stone. Cassie built with lies and air. Time has mercilessly put everything in its place. The real remained. The fake disappeared. But has Cassie Chadwick herself disappeared? No. She simply changed her face and era. In 2019, the world watched with bated breath the story of Anna Sorokina, known as Anna Delvey. A girl from a simple family, posing as a rich German heiress, lived in New York hotels, deceiving banks and the elite of Manhattan. Does the style sound familiar? This is a direct reincarnation of Cassie. The same techniques, arrogance, hints of trust funds, using the greed of those around her. Cassie Chadwick was the patient zero of a virus that today we call imposter syndrome in its criminal form. She invented the fake it till you make it scheme. Pretend until it becomes true. Elizabeth Holmes, the founder of Theranos, who deceived investors for billions of dollars, imitating a low voice and the confidence of Steve Jobs. This is also a spiritual great-granddaughter of Cassie. Simon Leviev, the Tinder swindler, another heir to her methods. Technology has changed. Instead of forged promissory notes, they now use Photoshop and screenshots of bank accounts. Instead of whispers in smoking rooms, Instagram posts. But human psychology has remained the same. We still want to believe in the fairy tale. We are still afraid to offend a rich person with distrust. Bankers of the 2025th year are just as susceptible to the fear of missing out as the bankers of Ohio in 1904. Cassie's legacy is an eternal warning of how easy it is to hack the system if you have no conscience. She proved that money is a collective hallucination. If everyone believes you are rich, you are rich. Until someone asks for the debt to be repaid. And what became of the other participants in this drama? The bank in Oberlin never recovered. Its collapse was a heavy blow to the local community and Oberlin College, whose funds also suffered. This case went down in banking textbooks as a classic example of why one should not issue loans on an honest word, even if that word is Carnegie. Banking regulations were tightened precisely thanks to such stories. Every time a bank today asks you for proof of income and collateral, know that this is partly thanks to the ghost of Cassie Chadwick. The mansion on Euclid Avenue, once the most luxurious house in Cleveland, was wiped off the face of the earth. Now, in its place are faceless office buildings and asphalt. Where the golden organ once stood, cars of clerks are now parked, who have never even heard of the former owner's name. This is the best metaphor for her life, a brilliant facade behind which a void was hidden. But there is one lesson that this story teaches us across the centuries. This is a lesson about the price of ambition. Cassie Chadwick did not simply want money. She wanted to be someone else. She hated reality, poverty, boredom, the mundane. She created a new identity for herself, as an actor creates a role. And she played it so talentedly that she herself began to believe her own lie. This is her tragedy. She was brilliant, intelligent, and charismatic. If she had directed this energy into a legal channel, she could have become the first female bank president or a corporation head. But she chose the short path. We began our story with her death in a prison cell on her 50th birthday. Let us return there for a moment. When the prison doctor covered her face with a sheet, he was not covering the eyes of Carnegie's daughter. He was covering the eyes of a frightened girl from a Canadian village who simply wanted the world to notice her. She got what she wanted. The world noticed her. Newspapers wrote about her from New York to London. Her name became a household word. But the price of this ticket to history turned out to be too high. She died alone, blind and disgraced, leaving behind only the ruins of other people's lives. In the world of big money, there is a rule. Capital shouts, wealth whispers. Andrew Carnegie whispered with his libraries. Cassie Chadwick shouted with her diamonds. And when the shout died down, only an echo remained. This was the story of a woman who sold her soul for gilding, but forgot to check the gold's assay. And when the layer of gilding wore off, all that was left underneath was the rusty metal of a prison bar.